My husband's inheritance tore our family apart. Now my children hate each other because of my secret. My name is Margaret Miller. I'm 47 years old, though most days I feel twice that. Time has a strange way of aging you from the inside out when your life has been a string of choices you can't take back. I used to be a wife, a mother, a believer in second chances. Now I'm just a woman talking to ghosts, trying to make sense of where everything went wrong. I tell this story because someone needs to know that love alone isn't enough. It never was. Love is fragile, like glass. And the truth is, the hammer you keep hiding behind your back, praying no one ever asks you to use it. My husband's name was Richard Miller. He was 52 when he died. He was a good man. Steady, kind, the kind who made people feel safe just by walking into a room. When he laughed, you could feel the house itself breathe easier. We met when I was 25, in a small town where everyone knew each other's names but not each other's secrets. I was working as a seamstress back then, raising my daughter alone. Her name was Grace. She was 3 years old, a small, bright spark in a life that had gone dark too early. Grace wasn't Richard's daughter. That's the first truth I ever buried. Her father was a man named Samuel Hayes, a traveling musician who came through town when I was 21. He was the kind of man who spoke like every word was a promise. He played guitar in bars, wrote songs no one ever heard, and smiled like he already knew how the story would end. I loved him with the kind of foolishness only young women are capable of. When I told him I was pregnant, he said all the right things, that we'd figure it out, that I'd never have to do this alone. 2 months later, he left for a gig and never came back. I sent letters. None were answered. Eventually, I learned he had a wife in another town, a family he'd never mentioned. That was the day I stopped believing in love that comes easy. I raised Grace on my own for 3 years. We lived above a bakery that always smelled like bread and rain. It was small, but it was ours. I worked long hours, sewed until my hands ached, and saved every penny. People pitied me, but I didn't care. Grace was all I needed. She had Samuel's eyes, deep, brown, and full of questions, and she laughed at everything. Sometimes I'd watch her sleep and wonder if she'd ever forgive me for bringing her into a world already so full of lies. Then, one afternoon, Richard Miller walked into my life. He came into the shop with a torn jacket, polite, soft-spoken, carrying the kind of sadness that doesn't scare you but invites you closer. He was a widower, though he didn't say it right away. He just handed me his coat and smiled. I fixed the jacket that same evening, and when he came to pick it up, he brought coffee. The next week, he brought lunch. The week after that, he brought a toy rabbit for Grace. He wasn't like Samuel. No songs, no promises, no dreams too big to be real. Richard's love was quiet, consistent, the kind that built rather than consumed. When he asked me to marry him, I told him everything. About Samuel, about Grace, about the shame I carried like a second skin. I told him I would understand if he couldn't love a woman with another man's child. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "I don't love you for where you've been, Margaret. I love you for where you're going." That sentence changed my life. It made me believe that maybe love could be reborn from the ruins. Richard adopted Grace officially the following year. She was 4. He treated her like his own, never once making her feel different. And for a while, we were happy, the kind of happiness that feels fragile even as you live it. We had a home, a small one, but filled with warmth. Grace grew up healthy, bright, and curious. She called Richard Dad from the very beginning. She never knew another one. When I was 28, I gave birth to our son, David. He was everything. His father had been strong, kind, a little stubborn. Grace loved him instantly. She helped me feed him, told everyone at school she had a baby brother. Watching them together was like watching sunlight fall on still water. Simple, peaceful, pure. I thought we had outrun the past. I thought we had built something strong enough to last. But I was wrong. Love built on silence is just a house without a foundation. You can live in it for a while, but one day the walls start to crack. It started when Grace turned 9. One evening, she came to me while I was folding laundry. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Mom," she said, "why doesn't Daddy look at me the same way he looks at David?" I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "When David does something, he smiles like he's proud. But when I do, he smiles like he's sad." I felt something break inside me. I wanted to tell her the truth, that her father was a man who'd left us, that Richard had chosen her despite it all, that she was a miracle in a world that had given me nothing. But I couldn't. The words got trapped somewhere between my throat and my shame. So I lied. "He loves you both the same," I said. She smiled, believing me, and ran off to play. I stood there for a long time after she left, realizing that the lie I just told her wasn't to protect her. It was to protect myself. Years passed, and the lie became part of the family. Richard loved them both, that was true. But differently. He tried not to show it, but I saw it in small things. The way he'd linger longer in David's room at night, the way his eyes softened when David laughed, the way he'd ruffle Grace's hair but rarely held her the same way. It wasn't cruelty, it was human. Blood calls to blood. Grace never said anything again, but I could feel the distance growing between them. By the time Grace turned 22, she was studying literature at the local university. She had grown into a thoughtful young woman, quiet, but strong. David was 19, full of fire and dreams, just like his father had been. And I was just grateful they were both still under my roof, still within reach. But life has a way of unraveling right when you think you finally tied all the knots. Richard's illness came suddenly. At first it was just fatigue, then pain, then hospital visits that became longer each time. He tried to hide how bad it was, but I knew. One night I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "Margaret," he said, "promise me something. Promise me you'll take care of them." I nodded, even though I didn't know what he meant. He died 2 months later, at 52, his hand in mine, his last breath a whisper of her name. Grace. I don't think David ever forgave him for that. The day we read his will, the air in the lawyer's office felt too heavy to breathe. Grace sat on my left, David on my right. I remember the way their shoulders touched, but their hearts didn't. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. Half of the estate, the house, the land, the savings, went to Grace. The rest to David. For a moment, no one said a word. Then David laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. It was something broken. Of course, he said. Of course she gets more. Grace's eyes widened. David, that's not... Don't, he snapped. Don't pretend you didn't know. He turned to me. Why her? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't destroy him. Grace tried to reach for him, but he pulled away. She's not even his blood, he muttered. Grace froze. What? He looked at me then, straight into my soul, and I saw the moment he realized the truth. My silence confirmed everything. That night, David didn't come home. Grace locked herself in her room, and I sat in the dark, holding Richard's wedding ring in my hand, wondering how a secret meant to protect a family could be the very thing that killed it. People say the past is something you can leave behind. But the past has feet, and it knows where you live, and from that day on, I knew the storm was coming. After the will was read, something in my son's eyes changed forever. I had seen anger in David before, frustration, rebellion, the normal, fire of a 19-year-old boy who thought the world owed him something. But this was different. This wasn't anger. It was betrayal. The kind that doesn't burn, but freezes. The kind that builds a wall so high you can't even see where the sky begins anymore. That night, he didn't come home. Grace sat at the kitchen table until dawn, waiting for him. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the clock on the wall like she could slow it down with her eyes. I wanted to tell her he'd be fine, that he just needed time. But deep down, I knew. When love turns into resentment, time doesn't heal it, it hardens it. When David finally came back the next afternoon, his clothes were soaked with rain, his face pale and empty. He didn't say a word to me. He walked past the table, past Grace, up the stairs, and slammed his bedroom door. The sound made the whole house shake. Grace flinched. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. He hates me, she whispered. I wanted to tell her it wasn't true, but I'd promised myself years ago I wouldn't lie anymore. And yet, the truth was so much crueler. So I said nothing. Over the next few weeks, the silence between my children became unbearable. We still had dinners together, or at least we sat at the same table. But the air was thick with everything unsaid. Grace would ask about his day. David would pretend not to hear. When she laughed, he would leave the room. It was like watching two ghosts haunting the same house, unable to see each other. Sometimes at night, I'd hear David's footsteps pacing in his room, back and forth, like he was walking the edges of something dangerous. I'd stand outside his door, my hand on the doorknob, wanting to go in, but I never did. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find. One night, he came home late again. The clock said midnight. He smelled like whiskey. His eyes were glassy, red, distant. He looked at me, then at the framed photo of Richard on the wall. He loved her more, he said, his voice flat. Don't say that, I whispered. He smirked bitter. Why not? It's true, isn't it? Half of everything, Mom, half. He couldn't even wait to die before choosing his favorite. I felt something heavy press down on my chest. He didn't choose a favorite, I said softly. He chose peace. He wanted both of you to have something to hold on to. David laughed, that dry, humorless laugh that sounds like it hurts. Peace? You think giving half his life to someone who wasn't even his blood was peace? I froze. What did you say? His eyes snapped to mine. You heard me. Then he walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the kitchen with the sound of his words echoing through my bones. Grace didn't know yet. She thought his anger was just grief. She thought time would fix it. She kept trying, leaving notes on his door, cooking his favorite meals, pretending everything was still normal. But David didn't want normal. He wanted answers, and I knew sooner or later he'd find them. 2 days later, I went into his room while he was at work. I shouldn't have, but fear makes you cross lines you swore you'd never cross. His desk was a mess, papers, receipts, old photographs, and something that made my heart stop. Richard's handwriting. He had found one of the letters. It was the letter Richard had written to Grace, the one I'd hidden in the attic years ago. I'd told myself it was better that way, that it would spare her pain, that she didn't need to know she wasn't his by blood. But David had found it, and in finding it, he'd found the truth. The letter was short, gentle, written in the steady hand of a man trying to make peace with himself. It said, "My dearest Grace, you may not be my blood, but you are my heart. And if I could choose a daughter from all the children in the world, I'd choose you again." I sat down on his bed, holding the letter, shaking. I wanted to burn it, hide it again, do anything to keep the secret buried. But it was too late. Once the truth is seen, it can never be unseen. That evening, when David came home, he didn't speak to me. He just stood in the doorway, looking at me with that same cold expression. How long, he asked. How long have you been lying to us? My throat closed. David, please. How long? He shouted. I couldn't answer. Grace came running down the stairs. What's happening? She asked, her voice trembling. David turned to her, his words like knives. You want to know what's happening? You're not his daughter. The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped breathing. Grace blinked, confused. What are you talking about? David threw the letter at her. She caught it, her hands shaking. I tried to grab it, but she stepped back. Her eyes moved across the page, slow at first, then faster, until her lips parted in shock. When she looked up, her face was pale. Mom, she whispered. Tell me this isn't true. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The room spun. David's voice filled the space again. She lied to you. She lied to him. She lied to all of us. Grace stared at me like I was a stranger. Mom, she said again, her voice breaking. Please. I couldn't lie anymore. I just nodded. Her knees gave out. She fell to the floor sobbing. David turned and walked out without another word. The door slammed. I dropped to my knees beside Grace, reaching for her, but she pushed me away. Don't touch me, she cried. You lied to me my whole life. I wanted to explain, to tell her that I had loved her every day since the moment she was born, that every lie I told was to protect her from the cruelty of truth. But all she could hear was the lie, and all I could hear was her sobbing. That night she left the house. It was raining, hard, relentless, the kind of rain that feels like punishment. I ran after her barefoot, calling her name, but she didn't look back. The rain blurred everything, the street, the lights, her figure fading into the dark. I don't know how long I stood there, soaked to the bone, whispering her name like a prayer no one was listening to. When I finally went back inside, the house felt colder than it ever had before. For days, I didn't see either of them. Grace didn't come home. David didn't call. I walked from room to room, touching their things, as if my hands could somehow hold on to the pieces of them still left behind. Every night, I sat in Richard's old chair and read his letters. I wanted to believe he was still here, that maybe he could tell me what to do. But his words were just ink now. And I was just a woman sitting alone in the ruins of everything she'd built on silence. When Grace finally came home, she looked different. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't hug me. She just said, I saw him. Who? I asked. David. My heart jumped. Where? The bar near the highway. He wouldn't talk to me. Her voice cracked. He looked through me like I was nothing. I reached for her, but she stepped back. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? My hands were shaking. Because I wanted to protect you. Protect me from what? She cried. From knowing that I don't belong? Tears streamed down her face. You didn't protect me, Mom. You destroyed me. Then she went upstairs and closed the door. That night, I sat outside her room, listening to her sob until she finally fell asleep. And as I sat there, I realized something terrible. This house wasn't haunted by Richard's death. It was haunted by me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. I looked out the window and saw David's car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced. I ran downstairs, praying that maybe somehow he had come to make peace. But when he walked in, his eyes told me otherwise. Grace came out of her room, standing at the top of the stairs. David, she said softly. Please, can we just talk? He laughed bitter. Talk? Now you want to talk? I never wanted this, she said. You think that makes it better? His voice rose. You think you can just say sorry and everything's fine? She stepped closer. I loved Dad too. That's when he snapped. Don't you dare say his name like you knew him better than I did. I shouted for them to stop, but my voice was drowned out by theirs. Grace's tears were falling freely now. He loved us both, David. No, he said, his voice shaking. He loved me. You were just the charity case Mom brought home. The words hit her like a slap. She stood frozen, trembling. You're wrong, she whispered. He was my father too. David's voice broke. No, he was mine. I slapped him. The sound was loud, final. His eyes widened. You just chose her, he said softly. Again. Then he turned and walked out. Grace fell to her knees, crying. I went to her, holding her, whispering her name, but she just kept repeating, why did you lie? I had no answer. Only the sound of rain against the window and the realization that I had finally lost both of them. For 3 days, I didn't hear from David. When the phone rang, I ran to answer it, hoping it was him. But it wasn't. It was the police. There had been an accident on the old highway. His car had hit a tree. They said it might have been the rain, the curve, bad timing. But I knew it wasn't the weather that killed my son. It was everything we never said. At his funeral, Grace stood beside me, silent. She didn't cry. When the priest spoke about forgiveness, she flinched. When he spoke about family, she closed her eyes. Afterward, as we walked away from the grave, she whispered, he died hating me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. That night, she came into my room. Her voice was barely a breath. I wish I'd been the one who died. I grabbed her hand. Don't say that. She looked at me, her face wet with tears. He was your real child? I was just your mistake. I couldn't breathe. Grace, no. You were my miracle. But she didn't believe me. And maybe she was right not to, because miracles don't destroy families. Lies do. And I was the one who told them. After David's funeral, the house became a tomb. The air felt heavier, colder, like grief had soaked into the walls. I used to believe that silence was peaceful, but now I know it's only peaceful when it doesn't have a heartbeat. Grace barely spoke. She moved through the rooms like a shadow, touching things that used to belong to him. His books, his baseball glove, the old wristwatch Richard had given him when he turned 16. Sometimes I'd find her sitting on the floor of his room, holding his shirt, breathing in what was left of his scent. I wanted to take it from her, to tell her that clinging to the dead is no way to live, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe because I was doing the same thing in my own way, clinging to memories, replaying every mistake, every word I should have said and never did. It's strange how death doesn't just take one person. It takes the people who love them too, just slower. Every day after David's burial felt like a test of endurance. I'd wake up, make coffee, set 2 cups on the table out of habit, then stare at the empty chair where he used to sit. Grace would come down the stairs silently, pour herself tea, and we'd sit there pretending that if we stayed quiet long enough, the world might reverse itself. But grief doesn't move backward. It moves in circles, trapping you where it hurts most. One morning, I found her in the garden. It was the same bench Richard had built for her 10th birthday. Old wood, cracked in places, half swallowed by weeds. She was staring at the lake, her face pale and tired. You should come inside, I said gently. It's cold. She didn't move. Do you ever think about what happens after? She asked. After what? After we die, I hesitated. Sometimes. She turned to look at me, her eyes red but dry. Do you think they forgive us? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I don't know, I said. Maybe they do. Maybe that's what heaven is. Forgiveness. Grace looked back at the lake. Then I hope I get there soon, I froze. Don't say that, she shrugged. It's not like I have anything left here. I sat beside her, forcing a smile I didn't feel. You have me. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pity. Do I, Mom? She whispered. Do I really? I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching every surface like a blind woman trying to remember the shape of her life. I stopped in front of Richard's portrait, that same calm smile that once made me feel safe. You should have told them, I whispered. You should have been the one to carry it. But the dead don't answer. They just leave you with their silence. The next day, the phone rang. It was Mr. Harlan, our lawyer. His voice was soft, hesitant. Margaret, he said, I found something. I frowned. What do you mean? A letter, he said. From Richard. He asked me to give it to you only if the family ever fell apart. My hands began to shake. Can you send it to me? I think you should come in. When I arrived at his office, he handed me an envelope, yellowed, edges frayed, my husband's handwriting on the front. To my family, if love turns to silence. My breath caught. I sat down and opened it. Richard's words were written carefully, each one deliberate, heavy with love and foresight. My dearest Margaret, Grace, and David. If you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I don't know what, but I know our hearts. I know how pride grows where pain begins. Whatever has happened, remember that none of you owes me anything. You were my life, my joy, my peace. Whatever I've left behind, the house, the money, the name, they are only things. Don't let them become poison. Please love each other. Forgive each other. That's all I ask. By the time I finished reading, I could barely see through my tears. I folded the letter carefully, holding it against my chest like it was his hand. He tried to warn us, I whispered. Mr. Harlan nodded. He did. When I got home, Grace was in the kitchen, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. I handed her the letter. It's from your father. She looked at me, confused, but took it. She read it slowly, silently, and when she reached the last line, her lips trembled. We should have read this before the will, she said quietly. It wouldn't have changed anything, I replied. Yes, she said. It would have changed me. That night, we sat together by the fire for the first time in weeks. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The flames flickered against her face, making her look like the child she used to be. After a while, she said, Do you think he'd forgive me? I looked at her, my throat tight. He already did, sweetheart. Long before you asked, she nodded, staring into the fire. I wish I could see him. Just once more, I didn't know what to say. I should have said something, anything. But I didn't. And that silence became my last mistake. The next morning, her room was empty. Her bed was made. Her window was open, the curtains swaying in the cold wind. On her pillow was an envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom, please don't hate me. I just want to be with him again. I can't live with the silence anymore. You did your best. I love you more than I deserved. I dropped the letter and ran outside, calling her name until my voice broke. The sky was gray, the wind sharp. I ran to the lake, the same one where she used to play, the same one where Richard had proposed to me 25 years earlier. Her car was there, parked near the edge. The driver's door was open. The keys were still in the ignition, but the seat was empty. They searched for 3 days. The divers went into the water, dragging nets through the murky depths. They found her coat, her shoes, and the locket I'd given her on her 16th birthday. But not her body. The police called it a probable drowning. I called it what it was, the final price of my silence. The night after they called off the search, I sat by the lake until dawn. The water was still, dark, endless. I talked to her, though I don't know if anyone heard. I told her I was sorry, that I'd spent my whole life trying to protect her from the truth when the truth was the only thing that could have saved her. I told her that she was never a mistake, that she was the only pure thing I'd ever done. I told her that her father, both of them, had loved her in their own broken ways. And when the sun rose, I felt nothing but emptiness. People came to the house after that, neighbors, church ladies, even the priest, bringing food, prayers, sympathy. I thanked them all, but their words slid off me like water off glass. What do you say to a woman who has lost everything? What comfort is there for someone who knows that every death in her family traces back to her own choices? I stopped answering the phone. I stopped going to church. I stopped existing, except in the spaces where my ghosts lived. Sometimes late at night, I hear footsteps upstairs. Sometimes I swear I hear Grace humming the tune she used to sing as a child. Once I woke up and saw her shadow in the hallway. Small, still, like she was waiting for me. I whispered her name and she was gone. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if she's really there. Maybe it's both. A month after her disappearance, I went to the attic. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe closure, maybe proof that she'd ever really existed. I found an old box filled with photographs. Richard holding baby David, Grace blowing out candles, me smiling beside them all, pretending not to see the cracks already forming beneath the surface. At the bottom of the box, I found another envelope. It was one I'd written years ago but never sent. On the front, it said, "To Grace when you're ready." I don't even remember writing it, but the handwriting was mine. Inside was a single page. "My dear Grace, I don't know when you'll read this, but if you ever feel lost, I need you to remember this. You are not defined by where you came from. You are mine in every way that matters. The world will tell you blood is everything, but it's not. Love is. And if I've ever failed to show you that, I hope someday you'll understand why I tried so hard to protect you from the truth." I stared at the letter for a long time, then burned it in the fireplace. It was too late. The words couldn't reach her anymore. Now when I walk through the garden, I still see her everywhere. Her laughter in the wind, her footprints in the soil, her face in the reflection of the water. Sometimes I think I hear David's voice too, calling to her, calling to me. Maybe that's what happens when you lose too much. The dead stop feeling dead. They become part of you. I don't know how long I'll keep living like this. Every night I light 3 candles, 1 for each of them. I talk to them as if they can still hear me. Maybe they can. Maybe heaven isn't a place far away, but something that waits right beside us, invisible, patient. All I know is that the silence in this house isn't empty anymore. It's full of love, full of regret, full of the ghosts of everything I should have said, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I can almost see them standing by the lake, Richard, David, and Grace waiting for me, smiling, forgiving, calling me home. When people say confession brings peace, they've never lived with the kind of truth that can end a life. I used to think keeping a secret was an act of mercy, that silence could protect the ones you love. But now I understand, silence doesn't protect. It preserves pain. It keeps it alive, feeding it until it grows big enough to swallow you whole. I have lived with one truth for more than 2 decades, one that began before Richard, before Grace ever said her first word, before I even understood what love really was. And now that everyone who might have been hurt by it is gone, I think it's time to finally say it aloud. Maybe not for forgiveness, but for the small relief of no longer pretending I was ever innocent. When I was 21, I fell in love with a man named Samuel Hayes. He was 30 then, maybe 31, older, confident, the kind of man who made you feel like the world was waiting just for you. He came to town one summer carrying a worn guitar and the smell of cheap cigarettes. He played in small bars for money and in the park for pleasure. I met him when he came into the laundromat where I worked, asking if I could sew a button on his shirt. He said it with a grin, and I remember laughing, not realizing that smile would ruin my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Samuel was charming, but he carried an edge, the kind that makes women both drawn and afraid. He talked about dreams like they were destinations, about love like it was a religion. I was young, naive, and lonely. I had just lost my mother, and my father had remarried a woman who didn't know how to love anyone but herself. So when Samuel looked at me like I was the only thing in the world worth looking at, I mistook attention for salvation. We spent that summer together. He played guitar under the trees, sang songs he said were written for me, and told me I was different from the others. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because when you've been invisible your whole life, love feels like a kind of miracle. When I told him I was pregnant, he went quiet. Not angry, not afraid, just quiet like someone had pulled the air out of his lungs. Then he smiled that same beautiful false smile and said, "We'll figure it out." I believed him again, foolishly. 2 weeks later, he left town for a gig in Chicago. He said it was only for a month. He never came back. For a while, I tried to convince myself he'd return. I wrote him letters every week, kept them in a box beside my bed. I told him about the baby kicking, about the names I was thinking of, about how scared I was, but how much I wanted him to meet her. None of the letters were ever answered. 6 months later, I heard from a friend that he'd been seen playing in a club in Missouri, with a woman wearing a ring on her finger. That was the night I stopped writing. That was the night I stopped believing in anyone but myself. When Grace was born, I gave her his eyes. That's what I used to tell people when they said she looked like me. I wanted her to have something of him, even if it was only in stories. I never told anyone who her father was. Not my neighbors, not my family, not even Richard, not at first. I told them he'd died in an accident, a story that grew smoother every time I told it, until even I could almost believe it. For 3 years, it was just Grace and me. I worked long hours, slept little, and loved her with a fierceness that scared me. She had Samuel's spirit, wild and curious, always asking questions. "Where's my daddy?" She used to ask, and I'd tell her he was watching over us. I think part of me hoped it was true, even if I knew better. Then Richard came along. I was 25 and he was 31, 6 years older, a mechanic with steady hands and quiet eyes. He didn't ask for my story. He just offered kindness, patience, and something I hadn't felt in years, safety. When he first met Grace, she was 3. She ran up to him, handed him a dandelion, and said, "You can be my daddy if you want." He laughed and said, "I'd like that very much." He asked me to marry him a year later. I remember sitting across from him at dinner, my hands trembling, thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. I told him the truth that night. I told him about Samuel, about the lies, about the shame that followed me like a ghost. I told him he didn't have to marry me, that I didn't want to build another life on a lie. He listened in silence, then said, "Margaret, I'm not marrying your past. I'm marrying your heart." For years I believed him. He adopted Grace when she was 4. I watched him hold her hand through every milestone, her first day of school, her first recital, her first heartbreak. He loved her truly, but there was always something unspoken between them, some invisible line that neither of them could cross. Maybe he saw Samuel in her eyes. Maybe she felt the difference without understanding it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself love was enough. It wasn't. The day Grace turned 9, Richard and I had our first real argument about her. He said she needed discipline, that she was growing too curious, too independent. I told him she was just a child. He looked at me and said, "She's not mine, Margaret. I'm trying, but she's not." That sentence broke something in me I didn't know could break. I didn't speak to him for days after that. But eventually we went back to pretending. Because that's what we did best. We pretended. When David was born 3 years later, everything changed again. Richard was a different man with him. He was softer, prouder, more at ease. He'd hold David like he was holding his own future. And Grace, sweet loyal Grace, adored her little brother. She used to kiss his forehead and say, "You're my favorite." I thought maybe love could heal what truth had broken. I didn't realize I was just burying it deeper. Over the years, I noticed how Richard looked at them differently. He didn't mean to. He tried to hide it. But love has a way of showing itself even in silence. When David would fall and scrape his knee, Richard would rush to him. When Grace did, he'd wait for her to get up on her own. Small things. But small things add up. I remember one night when Grace was about 15, she came to me in tears. "Mom," she said, "why does Dad love David more?" I told her she was imagining it. She wasn't. She said, "He looks at me like I'm someone else." I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your child that she's right? That the man who raised her with kindness still carries the shadow of another man every time he sees her face? I told her, he loves you in his own way. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. When Richard got sick, everything came back. The guilt, the fear, the memory of every lie I told. One night, he called me to his bedside. "Margaret," he whispered, "there's one thing I need to ask. If something happens to me, will you tell her the truth?" I froze. "Why?" "Because she deserves to know," he said. "She deserves to understand why I couldn't love her the way she needed me to." I shook my head. "No, it'll destroy her." He smiled sadly. "It'll destroy you more if you don't." He died 3 weeks later. I found the letter he'd written for Grace in his desk, the one that said she wasn't his by blood, but by choice. I should have given it to her then. But I couldn't. I told myself she wasn't ready. Maybe I wasn't. And now, here I am, the last one left in this house that once echoed with laughter. My husband gone. My son gone. My daughter lost to the lake. And me, left with the truth that built their graves. If anyone ever finds this, if some stranger stumbles upon this recording, or this letter, or whatever remains of me, I want them to understand something. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heartless. I was afraid. Afraid of losing love. Afraid of the world judging my child for something she never asked for. Afraid of the look in her eyes if she ever saw the shame in mine. But fear, I've learned, is just another name for cowardice. And cowardice dressed as protection still kills just the same. Samuel Hayes died years ago, a car accident in Kansas. I read it in the paper one morning. I didn't feel anything. Not hate, not relief, not grief. Just emptiness. As if the universe had decided that even justice wasn't worth giving him. Sometimes I wonder if Grace knows, wherever she is, that the man she once called Dad was never the one who left me, but the one who stayed. That Richard Miller was the only man who ever loved her without conditions, even when it hurt him to do so. I live alone now. The garden has grown wild. The lake is calm again. Some mornings I sit by the window with my tea and watch the mist rise from the water. I like to think that's where she is. Somewhere in the mist, free from all the things that broke us. I still talk to her. Every night before I sleep, I say, "Good night, my Grace." I tell her I love her. I tell her I'm sorry. I tell her that if there's another world beyond this one, I hope we find each other again, without lies, without guilt, without the past between us. And if that world doesn't exist, if this is all there ever was, then at least now, the truth is finally free. I don't know what day it is anymore. I stopped counting somewhere between grief and forgiveness. When you live alone long enough, time becomes like dust, always there, never noticed, except when the light hits it just right. The house is quiet now, quieter than it's ever been. The clocks still tick, but it's not time they're measuring anymore. It's emptiness. I'm 63 now, though I feel older. My hair has turned white, my hands have gone thin, and sometimes I forget where I put things, like the past is stealing pieces of me one by one. I live in the same house, our house, though it doesn't feel like ours anymore. The garden has overgrown, the paint on the porch is peeling, and the lake outside my window is as still as glass. The world has moved on, but I'm still here, anchored by memories too heavy to let go of. I've spent the last 10 years trying to make peace with what happened. Some days I tell myself I have. Other days, I wake up in the middle of the night, hearing Grace's voice calling from the water, or David's footsteps pacing the hallway, or Richard's laugh echoing faintly through the walls. Maybe that's what hell really is. Not fire, not torment, but the sound of the things you've lost coming back to visit you in dreams. People from town stopped coming by long ago. At first, they'd bring flowers, food, prayers. Then pity. Then nothing. I don't blame them. Grief is contagious. It makes people afraid, not of you, but of themselves. They see you and they see what could happen to them. So they leave. And you're left to learn how to live with ghosts. I started writing letters a few years ago. Not to anyone living. Just letters I'd never send. One for each of them. I keep them in a box by the window. The same box that once held Samuel's letters. The ones that never came. It feels poetic in a cruel sort of way. How everything circles back to silence. Sometimes I imagine that if I walk down to the lake and whisper their names, the water might ripple in reply. I know that's not how the world works. But when you've buried your entire heart, faith becomes the only bridge left to cross. So I keep talking to them, just in case. The last time I went into town, I saw a young woman with dark hair and brown eyes. She was holding her child's hand, a little boy, maybe 5. He laughed, and for a moment I saw Grace in him. It hit me so suddenly I had to sit down on the bench outside the pharmacy. I realized then that Grace would have been 42 this year, maybe with children of her own. David would have been 39, maybe married, maybe a father too. I let myself imagine it. Christmases full of laughter, birthdays with too many candles, arguments that ended in hugs instead of funerals. And for a second, I believed it. I believed in a world where my children had lived, where love had survived, where I hadn't been too afraid to tell the truth. But then I blinked, and the world went back to being what it is. Quiet, gray, and empty. I've started to dream again lately. In the dreams, I'm by the lake and the sun is setting. Grace is there, standing by the water's edge, her dress moving with the wind. David is beside her, his hands in his pockets, smiling that half smile he used to give when he was pretending not to care. And behind them, I see Richard, standing in the shade of the old oak tree, watching them both with that soft look in his eyes, the one that always meant home. They don't speak in the dream, they just look at me as if waiting. I wake up before I reach them every time. But each night, the distance between us gets smaller. Maybe that's what dying feels like, walking slowly toward the people you lost, one dream at a time. I've been sick for a while now. The doctor says it's my heart. He uses words like degenerative and congestive, words that mean the same thing, ending. I don't fear death anymore. I think I've already lived through the hardest part of it. I've died a little each time I spoke their names, each time I walked into their empty rooms, Each time I remembered the sound of their voices and realized how faint it's become. Now all I want is to go where they are. I've written one last letter. It's sitting on the table beside me as I write this. It's not addressed to anyone in particular. Maybe to God, maybe to the wind, maybe to whoever finds me. It says simply this: if love and truth ever stand on opposite sides, choose truth. Love built on lies is a cage, and the people inside will spend their lives mistaking it for safety. I thought I could protect the people I loved from pain, but I was wrong. All I did was pass it down like an inheritance. If you ever love someone, tell them the truth, even if it breaks you. Because the truth is the only thing that can outlive us. When I finished writing it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It was small, fragile, but it was there like the first light before dawn. It's late now. The house is dark except for the candle beside me. The flame flickers. The shadows move across the walls, and for a moment, I can almost see them here again. Grace reading by the window, David playing his guitar, Richard humming softly while fixing the radio that never worked. I can hear their laughter. I can feel the warmth again. It's faint, but real. I stand up slowly, holding the letter in my hand. I walk to the window and look out at the lake. The moon is full tonight. The water glows like silver, calm and endless. I open the door and step outside. The air is cool and the grass is wet under my feet. Each step feels lighter than the last, as if the earth itself has stopped resisting me. When I reach the edge of the lake, I kneel down. The reflection in the water startles me, not because I look old, but because I look like my mother. The same eyes, the same tired mouth, the same expression of someone who's loved too much and lost more than she thought possible. I smile faintly. It's time, I whisper. The wind stirs, gentle, almost like a reply. I take the letter, fold it neatly, and place it on the rock beside me. Then I light one last candle and set it in the water. It drifts slowly, the flame trembling but refusing to die. I watch it float away, smaller and smaller, until it's just a spark in the distance, like the last piece of me making its way home. They'll find the house tomorrow, maybe the day after. The neighbors will notice the light still on, the door unlocked. They'll come inside, call my name, and hear nothing but silence. They'll find the note on the table, the candle burned to wax, the window open to the night. Maybe they'll cry. Maybe they won't. But I hope someone will read these words and understand that I wasn't trying to disappear. I was trying to go back. Back to the place where I last heard laughter. Back to where forgiveness still lives. Back to the people who made this life worth living, even when I didn't deserve it. If there's a heaven, and I believe there is, I don't think it's a place far above us. I think it's here in moments like this. In the breath before the end. In the whisper of wind over water. In the memory of love that refuses to fade. I think heaven is what happens when all the pain finally runs out of things to hurt. The candle is almost gone now. The night feels different, lighter somehow. I close my eyes and let the wind touch my face. I think I hear them. Grace's laughter, David's voice, Richard's soft Margaret. And for the first time in years, I smile without guilt. I whisper, I'm coming home. And the world goes quiet.